The senator has been making this last day before the New York primary a most productive one as he runs around the city from subway stops this morning to senior citizen centers to hospitals. You've had a busy day. Vice President Mondale was also in town today saying the handwriting's on the wall, that the nomination is Jimmy Carter's. The president's campaign manager for New York, Joel McCleary, is saying it's time to put the party back together again. They're sounding as though it's all over.
Well, I don't believe that it is all over. I believe that the New Yorkers now have a opportunity to make an extremely important difference in the future direction of our country. In my travels around New York City and New York State, I think people feel that they haven't been fairly treated by this administration. With the announcement by Mr. Carter that there'd be significant cuts, and this administration refuses to level with New York City on where those cuts are going to come. We read in the newspapers of several $100 million of cuts in education and health services and mass transit. And why won't Mr. Carter or Mr. Mondale level with the people of New York on this issue? And I think that's really been typical of the concern of this administration with regards to both New York City and the major urban areas over the period of the last 3.5 years. And I believe that we need to have an administration that's going to stand for the urban areas. That's where 80% of the American people either live or they're dependent upon it. And I also believe that the people of New York feel that we need to take strong measures to deal effectively with our economy. I favor a freeze on prices, on interest rates, wages right across the board, and then putting in place the kinds of economic policies that will bring restoration to our economy.
Well, right now, Peter Bannon is out in Elmhurst, Queens, on Queen Boulevard on this rather wet night with some people who will be voting tomorrow. And I might have a question or two for you. Do we have Peter?
Here we are, Roger. We are here, and yes, they do have some questions. I'd like to start, first of all, with a couple of young ladies who will be voting for the first time, and you folks had a question.
Yes, I'd like to ask Senator Kennedy, I feel as a New Yorker that his only strong point is the way he treats inflation. And I'd like to say if he feels that alone, he can carry the state of New York in the primary tomorrow. And I would like to...
Okay.
Go ahead, Senator.
You want me just to make a comment? Let me just mention to your questioner, this administration has proposed cuts in the services for New York as a way to deal with inflation. And what it's going to mean is reduce services for elderly people, for students, for those that ride the mass transit. I think there's another way of dealing with inflation, and that's by putting in place a freeze on prices right across the board and then bringing back the strength of the American economy. I think there are areas in where we can cut the budget, and I think all of us favor moving towards a balanced budget. But the fact of the matter is we shouldn't ask the people of New York and the surrounding areas to bear undue burdens for the failures of the last 3 years.
Peter?
Senator, a rather pointed question from a young lady about to vote this year, 18, and what's that?
How do you feel about the registration for the draft for 18-year-olds?
I'm opposed to it. I wouldn't hesitate to implement a random selection system if we were facing a real national emergency. I don't believe we are at the present time. The only amount of time that would be saved by registration would be 14 days over a 6-month period, and I believe we can save that amount of time by eliminating some of the red tape and bureaucracy in the selective service system at the present time.
Peter, one more.
Okay, a gentleman who works downtown in the banking business, you had a question.
Yes, I'd like to ask the senator how he feels about President Carter's credit tightening on credit cards, and if he feels it will do us any good as a consumer who's paying 18% annually on a credit card to buy goods that I feel that I need and all middle-class Americans need.
Basically, I think that the steps which have been taken by Mr. Carter may very well mean higher rates of credit for you and for your friends and neighbors. It's really a Band-Aid solution to what should be a major effort to deal with the total problem of runaway inflation and high rates of interest. You see, if you bring inflation down, interest rates will come down. A freeze will bring inflation down. The last time a freeze was put into effect, inflation fell 2/3 in 1 month. Interest rates would follow. And then I think we'd have some meaningful action.
And that's really why you're going to stay in the race. You think things are going to be so bad economically that even though he has the votes, even though he wins the primaries, the president cannot win the election.
I'm satisfied. You know, it's interesting, and your own poll shows it basically even Steven. And the fact further remains is that the Republicans, for the first time since the beginning of poll taking, now are shown best able to deal with the problems of our economy. I'd like to believe that...
That could make Ronald Reagan president.
Well, I would hope that that wouldn't be the choice of the alternative, because I think that there are other ways of dealing with the economy.
But by staying in, don't you think that's a risk for the Democrats
Not
to
at
lose
all,
the White House?
because the fact of the matter remains, what is important for the Democratic Party is dialogue, discussion, and then the evolution of a policy that can protect the average citizen. We have, since the start of this race, there have been more and more people who have been involved, who have been energized by this campaign. I think that's constructive and hopeful for our party in the future.
Senator, thank you for the dialogue. Thank you, Peter, for the remote. That's it, gentlemen.